So, today let us discuss the 15th December 2015 newspaper. The most important article for today is about India-Japan relationship. The Sanjay Baru article talks about the vision document which is signed between India and Japan for 2025 and why this relationship is growing strong and its historical lineage. Now, this relationship, which has been raised to the level of special strategic and global partnership, has gone through a torturous route. Especially India, when tested a nuclear bomb, then Japan, being very sensitive to the nuclear issues, having a strong nuclear lobby, led to the imposition of the sanctions against India. In 1990 situation, if we see, the China was on rising and bureaucratic bottlenecks were a major hindrance for the India's economic growth. So in this context, the Japanese were more interested in investing in China, which was a growing economic power. And on the other hand, India's nuclear test is also a matter of suspicion for for Japan. From 2000 onwards, the China factor also is still important, especially India-Japan relations are concerned from a strategic perspective. Now, United States, Japan, they see India also has a counterbalance to the growing China. So, in this case, the strategic concerns are today dominating the Indo-Japan relationships. So, Japan is actively cooperating the development of infrastructure in India and also infrastructure to link its economy to the world, especially the Southeast Asia. Here, Japan is ready to finance development of infrastructure of India to, especially India's its own Belt and Road Initiative. It means it is actively helping us towards our Act East policy, which was mooted by the Prime Minister Modi. Now, in a present trip of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister has proposed, there is a word which is used that both the countries, they see that the Asia-Pacific region is necessary for strategic engagement. So it is the first time India has entering in the lexicon of the terms related to the Pacific. And Japan is also actively cooperating India for its membership into APEC. Though United States of America is opposing, India is being actively pushed into the APEC by the Japan. And if you compare this with the last year, where the civil nuclear cooperation between India and Japan was almost in jeopardy, now the agreement was taken forward and Shinzo Abe is ready to move to get the support from the Japanese parliament. So the nullability clause, which is the major block, is also being reconsidered or removed. And Japan also showed its confidence on the India's non-nuclear proliferation history. And finally, it implicitly shows that Japan has left the past behind. It is one way agreeing that India is a responsible nuclear power, so which is a strategic shift. Now, coming to the cautious cooperation with the Japan, it is related to the strategic interests. If you observe recently, Japan has shunned its pacifist role, which was responsible for its economic rise. Now, the new security laws are passed by the Japanese parliament, which allows the Japan to send its forces to fight outside its country, wherever its economic and strategic interests are involved. So, along with this, the President Obama's Asia's pivot policy also sees Japan as an important partner, and both of them have a strategic interest to bring India into that alliance. So, this is to counterbalance the rising China in Asia. So, for this, Shinzo Abe, he has recommended for democratic security diamond with India, United States, Japan, and Australia. So in this context, if we observe, though Japan is an industrial power, in Japanese exports, imports and investment to India, they don't even cross the 1% of total Japan's exports. So in this context, the trade relations can be taken further, which are more advantageous. Other than that, India tries to play for the strategic interests of these countries. It may ultimately lead to the militarization of this zone. It will affect or impact the India's long-term development. Now coming to the Human Development Report. Now it has specifically talked about issues related to the women and inequality. So in 2013, inequality factor was brought into Human Development Report, and India is dragged down because of the higher levels of inequalities which are existing. If you consider this 2014 report, the women participation rate or labor force participation rate has almost decreased by half. Labor force participation rate, it means that the number of women who are employed or who are actively seeking employment that has drastically come down. And the report specifically praises our MG Narega as a social security and also a workforce initiative. Now, the rights of the workers across the world are decreasing, and it calls for the providing for these rights of the workers. So now in this context, if you carefully observe, education is a leveling factor across the people. Now, inequality in India is clearly visible among the men and women in the education concerned. Typically, women has half the schooling years compared to men. So in this context, if India has to move on to the human development, women education has to be given a priority. On the other hand, there are three indicators under the Human Development Index: education, health, and per capita. The per capita incomes generally they reflect the economic growth. Education and health they reflect the development. So it shows that India is good on per capita income but not on education and health. It means India is unable to convert its growth to development. That is what is the significance the report gives him. And coming to the climate change conference talks, I'm going to do a special video on the Paris conference. So I'm not going to discuss deep into this, but however, the differentiation principle was adjusted in a lighter form, or else in UNFCCC convention or in Kyoto Protocol, the differentiation principle is the basic point. But here differentiation principle is talking about with the word in the light of different national circumstances. To that extent it stopped over there. And also absolute emission reduction targets were given to the developed countries, but in the case of the developing countries, the absolute emission reduction targets do not exist, but all the countries are requested to give their peaking years. And with regard to public funds, the transparency is been restored in the report. And understand, previously $100 billion they can be through private route or public route, whatever. In this context, OECD report has said already the private investments are to the tune of 60 plus billion dollars. Now, developing countries criticized it because of the double accounting standards. So that is the reason why greater transparency was requested, and it is also taken forward. And coming to loss and damage, with whatever the loss incurred, world countries has to compensate for the developing countries, but there is no liability and compensation mechanism over here. So without this, loss and damage becomes ineffective. And 5 years variability exists under the document. These are the things we need to consider. Coming to the foreign policy of Prime Minister Modi, what are the areas which he has focused on? Now, he has repeatedly talked about Asian solidarity, and this Asian solidarity is centered around the regional comprehensive economic partnership, cyber security architecture, and he was also talking about settlement of the disputes through multilateral routes. And with regard to the maritime, So for the first time, Indo-Pacific is the word which has entered into the Indian lexicon or else Indian negotiations. So this was in the India-Japan Vision Document 2025. And also Prime Minister Modi at various forums, he talked about the cyber policy, and the cyberspace has to be protected, and he recommended for the norms of behavior into the cyber policy. And on G20, he specifically talked about trade and energy. So in this, he has acknowledged that yes, the regional trading blocks which are developing, they are disturbing or fragmenting the WTO mechanism. And intellectual property rights. So he's trying to, that is alignment with regard to the TRIPS, and export control regimes, that is Australia Group, Wassenaar Group, missile technology control regime. All these things India is actively moving in. One more thing which Prime Minister Modi was talked about is UN reforms. This UN reforms was not mentioned in this article, but however there is some substance with regard to the movement of the things. And also the terrorism trade facilitation agreement. So with regard to this technology facilitation mechanism. So technology facilitation mechanism is related to achievement of the sustainable development goals in the post-development agenda 2015. Now G20, so with the China is becoming the chair of G20. In this context, what this says is, if the global economy has to be moved forward, the structural reforms are necessary in every country. Because of the structural reforms, the global trade is bound to increase. Our global GDP growth of 3% target can be achieved. And the countries are not taking a coordinated approach to fight the ongoing global recession. It talks about policy coordination, especially the monetary policy coordination across all the countries. And it acknowledged that the regional trading blocks are gaining strength. And it also have given an apprehension that it is decreasing the role of WTO. As the WTO role decreases, the trading, it more becomes fragmented, and it is not good for the global trade purposes. And another thing is the World Bank and IMF, they are dominated by the West, especially United States and major European industrialized countries. So in this context, the more and more share for the Asia to reflect the changed economic circumstances is also recommended by the China. So these are the three important points which are highlighted by the China for the coming G20. And coming to the collegium system, the next article, the major criticisms are surrounding the secrecy, lack of respect for the merit, and inadequate women participation. These are the things which we see. So in this context, what the article suggests is a screening committee has to be constituted, which has got all the stakeholders, and this has to give a choice to express the opinion. This screening committee shall consist of law minister and also from civil society, bar and everywhere. So this screening committee can form the basis for the government and the judiciary to make a decision on the future judges. So diesel cars, you know that National Green Tribunal recently has imposed a moratorium on the diesel cars. You know, in New Delhi, the particulate matter, that is especially of 2.5 microns, this is a major problem. So with regard to this, the diesel cars are considered as a major reason for this particulate matter. So the decreasing diesel and petrol price gap, it has to encourage the growing growth of the petrol cars. Contrary to this, in Delhi, the SUVs on diesel as a fuel are increasing. So, in America, as a reaction to this, fuel-efficient cars are being suggested. But however, practicality proved that fuel-efficient cars are leading to the greater driving by the people, or more driving and consumption of the fuel by the people. So the article suggests for a green tax on the diesel cars. And though India is also moving Bharat 5 norms, but however, the fuel efficiency alone cannot be a solution. So In this context, you know that recent Volkswagen issue where the defeat device is being installed into the cars. So the enforced mechanisms across the world are not strong enough towards the fuel efficiency and pollution reduction. So finally, the public transport is a efficient solution for the reduction of the pollution. So a developed country is one where the rich people have to take the public transport rather than the poor people buys a car. So that's what is the philosophy that has to be followed. If you take the Singapore, the private vehicles, especially cars, are heavily taxed, so that people are moving towards the public transport. Now, WTO issues. Already we have discussed this. In this, what it talks about is the farm subsidies of the developed countries, which were a major agenda during Doha, are no more considered as important, and the developed countries are moving the new issues. In this context, India wants to have a special safeguard mechanism, that is to protect the stockholding of India for its food security, and it also wants to bring in the reduction of the food subsidies given by the West, or farm subsidies given by the West, onto the major front of discussion at WTO Nairobi ministerial meeting. And finally, Beijing, Moscow, Bonhomme. So the Silk Road economic belt and Eurasian Economic Union, which the Russia is moving, SREB, which the China is propagating, their interests are meeting. So this is leading to the development of new architecture or strategic architecture that is surrounding the Eurasia. So in this context, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is changing its character, and it is also expanding more towards the south. So even Nepal has also become an observer status. So this is what is the article talks about. And thank you very much. All the best.